with the slightest movement in the mind, when the mind blinks, the samsara world appearance arises and ceases. So the mind blinks. It's like the eye blinking. When the eye is closed, the world appearance disappears. Here it's the mind that's blinking. I've said before that our non-conceptual state is apparent to us several times a day. It's probably apparent many times a day. We're not often engaging in notions. Our mind isn't constantly active. Much of our life is actually in a state of non-conceptualization. If that seems a bit strange, then just think about when listening to music or looking at a picture. We can be thinking about the music, we can be thinking about the picture, but very often, more often than not, we are just being open to it. We're just letting it do its thing. We're not analysing it, we're not thinking about it, we're being open to it, and we're possibly enjoying it on some level. And if you're asked why you like a piece of music, it's very hard to give a convincing reason for why you like a piece of music. You just say, well, I just like it. And very often we're just with whatever feelings that are going on. If we live a stressful life, of course, then we tend not to have a moment to dwell on what's going on in our feelings. Make the mind unwinking, free from movement of thought, by the restraint of the prana and also the latent tendencies, vasana. So here we've got this yogic notion of prana and restraining the prana. You can understand this in pranayamic terms if you wish, but from the point of view of self-inquiry, I would say just be very aware of your emotional tendency towards comfort, towards some kind of cosy oblivion, because we do have these tendencies within which we want to cocoon ourselves. We've got this tendency whereby we want to get into some kind of comfort zone. We've got two things here. We've got the prana and we've got the latent tendencies. The prana here could be understood as simply the attention, and the latent tendencies are the urge to turn the attention to our comfort zone. We've got this urge to create a nice cocoon around ourselves, and we direct our attention accordingly. When you feel under stress, your mind looks for fantasies to compensate for that. Very often sexual fantasies, actually. So this is what we need to look at. We need to look at the tendency to move in a certain direction. That's the psychological tendencies, the vasanas. And what is it that's moving? It's the prana, which here we can understand as the attention. We don't take the attention in that direction. We bring it back to itself, to our sense of being. By the movement, blinking of prana, the samsara arises and ceases. Again, you can understand this in terms of pranayama if it helps you, but it seems to me that this is talking about the attention again. When the attention blinks, that means the attention moves away from itself. We've got the whole world appearance that we're engaging in. When it doesn't move away from itself, then samsara ceases. By diligent practice, make the prana free from such movement. And this again is the attention, not letting the attention be hijacked. By the rise and cessation of foolishness, ignorance, self-binding action arises and ceases. And this was the action that this chapter began with. Action, karma, has consequences. But if you perform your actions with an unattached mind, a mind unattached to the consequences, then self-binding action ceases. Restrain it by means of self-discipline and the instructions of the preceptor and the scriptures. So this is practice. We have to be on the ball. The day can be a long time. We have a lot of different moods, a lot of different things that can happen to change our mood. Do we indulge our latent tendencies? Do we let the attention get drafted in to fulfilling these latent tendencies? And if we do, we're just reinforcing the pattern. So this is a choice we've got. This world illusion has arisen because of the movement of thought in the mind. And thought here is in the form of notions. When that ceases, the illusion will cease too, and the mind becomes no mind. This can also be achieved by the restraint of prana. That is the supreme state. I've spoken before about how there seems to be these different threads in the Yoga Vasishta. There's the thread of self-inquiry and the thread of traditional yoga, especially in the form of pranayama. But it seems to me that what's happening is that these traditional threads are being woven in and pointed in the direction of self-inquiry. So here pranayama is not an alternative to self-inquiry. It's something which can ultimately be dropped and self-inquiry practiced, just as when we heard about Vasishta's worship of Lord Shiva, he abandoned that mode of worship and commenced the worship of the omnipresent non-dual self. So with pranayama, it has to be understood ultimately that it's the attention that we're talking about. And this yogic way of talking about the restraint of thought, the movement of thought in the mind. The movement of thought is not the problem. It's identifying with that movement of thought. It's getting caught up with that movement of thought that's the problem. And when identification with that movement ceases, it says here that the illusion will cease too. The illusion doesn't cease. It's identification with the illusion that ceases. The mind becomes no mind in the sense that we're no longer caught up with it. So we're told that this can be achieved by the restraint of prana. It can ultimately be achieved only by restraining the attention from indulging itself, or from indulging the latent psychological tendencies. That is the supreme state, the bliss that is experienced in a state of no mind. That bliss which is uncaused is not found even in the highest heaven. So again we've got this talk of bliss, which is also very yogic, but we have to be careful with it, as the next sentence shows. In fact, that bliss is inexpressible and indescribable, and should not even be called happiness. So this bliss is not happiness. So we must be careful about forming notions of bliss. The mind of the knower of the truth is no mind, it is pure sattva. After living with such no mind for some time, there arises a state known as turiya-atita, the state beyond the transcendental, or the turiya state. So it's the state beyond the turiya, which is the fourth state. The turiya is the fourth state. We've got waking, sleeping, and dreaming. These are the three states, but there's a fourth state, and that is the state when the attention is attending to itself. And now we're also told there's a state beyond the turiya. Sometimes this is mentioned, sometimes it isn't. And the state beyond the turiya, the state beyond the transcendental, is the one that we cannot talk about. There is actually only the transcendental state, but when we talk about beyond the transcendental state, we're saying that we can't actually talk about it. And this leads us into the next chapter, which is the parable of the wood apple fruit.